If you're listening to this, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel and comment where you are listening this from. So let me start at the beginning. My father, Jonathan Michael Harper, was the kind of man who made you believe that goodness still existed in the world. He was a civil rights attorney in Chicago, a man who woke up every morning with a sense of purpose that bordered on religious conviction. He worked for a nonprofit legal aid organization called Justice Forward, representing people who couldn't afford representation, immigrants facing deportation, tenants fighting predatory landlords, workers who had been exploited by their employers. He made $65,000 a year. It wasn't much for a lawyer, especially not in Chicago, but my father had graduated from Northwestern Law School with offers from 3 major corporate firms, each offering starting salaries of $190,000. He had turned them all down. Money, he told me once when I was 10 years old, is just a tool, and like any tool, its value depends on what you build with it. I could take that corporate money and build a nice house and a nice car and a nice vacation home, or I could take less money and build something that matters. I could help people who have no one else to help them. That's the only kind of wealth that means anything. My father was tall, 6'3", with dark skin, kind eyes, and a laugh that could fill an entire room. He had hands that were perpetually covered in ink from the legal pads he carried everywhere. He had a mind that could parse complex legal arguments with surgical precision, and he had a heart that broke every single time he lost a case for a client he believed in. Our family wasn't wealthy. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom bungalow in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, the kind of house that had history but not prestige, the kind of neighborhood where people looked out for each other. My mother, Lorraine Harper, was a registered nurse who worked at Cook County Hospital. She worked the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., because the pay differential was better and because it meant she could be home during the day with my brother Marcus and me. My mother was beautiful in a way that didn't need announcing. She had warm brown skin, natural hair that she wore in locks, and a smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. She was the kind of nurse that patients remembered years later, the kind who would sit with someone who was scared, the kind who would fight with doctors when she thought a patient wasn't getting the care they needed. She made $58,000 a year. Combined with my father's salary, our household income was around $123,000, comfortable but not extravagant, not in Chicago, where the cost of living kept climbing. But we were happy. We were so incredibly happy. My brother Marcus was 3 years younger than me. He was 12 when everything changed. He was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic. The kind of kid who would rescue injured birds and nurse them back to health in cardboard boxes in our garage. I was 15, caught between childhood and whatever came next, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. Our family had rituals that held us together. Every Sunday we would go to church, not because my parents were particularly religious, but because they believed in community. After church, we would have family dinner at our house or at my grandmother's house in Hyde Park. My father's mother, Grandma Dorothy, was a retired school teacher who could cook better than anyone I've ever known. On weekday evenings, my father would come home around 7 p.m., tired but energized by the work he'd done that day. He would tell us about his cases, carefully, never violating client confidentiality, but sharing the essence of the legal issues and the human stories behind them. Today, he would say, I helped a woman who was about to be evicted because her landlord wouldn't fix the mold in her apartment. We went to court, and the judge ordered the landlord to make the repairs and pay her damages. She cried when I told her. She said she'd been so scared that she and her kids would end up in a shelter. My mother would listen with pride radiating from her face. She understood what it meant to help people. She did it every single day. On Friday nights, we would have movie night. My father would make his famous popcorn, cooked on the stove with real butter and just a hint of cayenne pepper. We would pile blankets on the living room floor and watch movies together. My father loved old films, Sidney Poitier, Dorothy Dandridge, Harry Belafonte. He wanted us to understand the history of Black excellence in cinema. On Saturday mornings, my father would take Marcus and me to the library. He believed deeply in reading, in education, in the power of knowledge. He said, "A book is the most dangerous weapon in the world. It can change your mind, and a changed mind can change the world." We were not wealthy in the way that mattered to the outside world, but we were wealthy in every way that actually mattered. We had love. We had stability. We had parents who showed up for us every single day, without fail. My father used to say, "Success isn't about how much money you make. Success is about whether you leave the world better than you found it. Success is about whether your children feel loved and safe. By that measure, I'm the most successful man alive." I believed him. We all did. And then, one Tuesday in March, everything ended. It was a Tuesday evening, March 17th. I remember because it was St. Patrick's Day, and my father had joked that morning about how he was Irish for a day and had worn a green tie to court. My mother was working the night shift at the hospital. Marcus and I were home alone doing homework. My father was working late on a case, a wrongful termination suit against a major corporation. He had called around 8 p.m. to say he was on his way home and asked if we wanted him to pick up pizza. "Extra cheese," Marcus had said, and my father had laughed. That was the last time I heard his voice. At 9:47 p.m., there was a knock on our door. I answered it to find 2 police officers standing on our porch, their faces grave. "Are you Kennedy Harper?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said, and something in my stomach dropped. "Is your mother home?" "She's at work. She's a nurse at Cook County." "What's wrong? What happened?" The officers exchanged looks. "Your father was in a car accident." One of them said carefully, "You need to come with us. We'll take you to your mother." "Is he okay?" I asked, but I already knew the answer from their faces. "We need to take you to the hospital," was all they would say. They drove Marcus and I to Cook County Hospital. Neither of us spoke during the drive. Marcus held my hand so tightly that it hurt. When we arrived, we were taken to a private waiting room, the kind they reserve for families receiving bad news. A social worker was there, a chaplain. My mother was there too, still in her scrubs, her face devastated. She pulled us both into her arms and held us for a long time before she could speak. "Your father," she said, and her voice broke. "Your father was in an accident. A car ran a red light and hit him. The driver was going 70 miles an hour. Your father, he didn't survive. He died at the scene." I don't remember much of what happened after that. I remember Marcus screaming. I remember my mother collapsing. I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me and I was falling through space. My father, the man who had kissed us goodbye that morning, who had laughed about his green tie, who had promised to bring home pizza, was gone. The police told us that the driver who hit my father was a man named Richard Cole. He was 43 years old. He claimed he had suffered a medical emergency, a sudden seizure, that caused him to lose control of his vehicle and run the red light. He was taken to the hospital, treated, and released. The police investigated. They found no evidence of alcohol or drugs in his system. His medical records showed a history of epilepsy, though he had been seizure-free for years and had been cleared by his doctor to drive. The investigation concluded that it was a tragic accident. Richard Cole was not charged with any crime. He sent a letter to our family expressing his deepest condolences and explaining that he had no memory of the accident due to the seizure. My mother couldn't even read the letter. She crumpled it up and threw it away. The insurance settlement was modest, $250,000 from the driver's insurance policy. My mother used part of it to pay for the funeral and part of it to pay off our mortgage. The rest she put into a trust fund for Marcus's and my college education, exactly as my father would have wanted. The trust was specific. It could only be used for educational expenses. My father had always believed that education was the key to everything. The trust was his final gift to us, ensuring that no matter what happened, Marcus and I would be able to go to college. The months after my father's death were the darkest of our lives. My mother stopped sleeping. She would work her night shifts at the hospital and then come home and sit in my father's chair, staring at nothing. She lost 20 pounds. Her hair started graying. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a matter of months. Marcus stopped talking. He would go to school, come home, do his homework, and sit in his room in silence. I would hear him crying at night through the wall that separated our bedrooms. I tried to hold everything together. I was 15, but I became the adult in the house. I cooked meals. I made sure Marcus got to school. I helped my mother remember to eat. I was drowning, but I couldn't let anyone see it. My grandmother, Grandma Dorothy, moved in with us for several months. She cooked and cleaned and tried to hold our family together. She would sit with my mother in the evenings and hold her hand while my mother cried. "He was a good man," Grandma Dorothy would say, "the best man I ever knew, and he loved you all so much." Friends from church came by with food. Colleagues from my father's nonprofit came by to share memories. My mother's co-workers from the hospital sent flowers and cards. But nothing helped. Nothing could fill the void that my father's absence had created. We were a family with a missing piece, and we didn't know how to function without him. 2 years after my father died, my mother met a man named Robert Blackwell. She met him at the hospital. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative who visited Cook County regularly to promote his company's products to doctors and nurses. He was handsome, charming, and attentive in a way that my mother desperately needed. Robert was 41 years old, 7 years older than my mother. He was tall, well-dressed, and articulate. He had a warm smile and an easy manner. He would bring my mother coffee when he saw her during her shifts. He would ask about her day and actually listen to her answers. "He's kind," my mother told me one evening, 6 months after she started seeing him. "After your father, I didn't think I would ever meet anyone kind again." I was 17 by then, a senior in high school, old enough to understand that my mother was lonely. She had spent 2 years grieving, and now she was trying to build something new. I wanted to be happy for her, but something about Robert made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate what it was. Marcus was 14, and even more withdrawn than he had been right after my father died. He barely spoke to Robert. When Robert tried to engage him in conversation, Marcus would give one-word answers and excuse himself. "Give him time," my mother said to Robert. "He's still grieving. We're all still grieving." "I understand," Robert said, and he seemed genuinely patient. "I'm not trying to replace his father. I just want to be here for all of you." 8 months after they met, Robert proposed to my mother. She said yes. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to see her smile again. I wanted her to have someone who would take care of her the way my father had. But something felt wrong. It felt too fast. It felt like my father hadn't been gone long enough. It felt like we were betraying his memory. Grandma Dorothy felt the same way. She pulled my mother aside at the engagement party and said, "Lorraine, are you sure about this? You barely know this man." "I know enough," my mother said. "I know that he loves me. I know that he wants to take care of me and the kids. I know that I can't do this alone anymore, Mama. I'm so tired of being alone." Grandma Dorothy didn't push further. What could she say? My mother was an adult. She was making her own choice. They got married in a small ceremony at a courthouse, followed by a reception at a restaurant. It was nothing like my parents' wedding, which I had seen in photographs, a joyful celebration in a church surrounded by family and friends. This was quiet, subdued, like my mother was afraid to be too happy, afraid that happiness would be taken away from her again. Robert moved into our house, my father's house, the house where my father had lived and loved and raised his children, and slowly things began to change. At first, Robert was kind. In front of my mother, he was the perfect stepfather, patient, supportive, interested in our lives. But when my mother wasn't around, he was different. It started with small things, comments that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried an edge. "Your father might have been a good man," he said to me one evening when my mother was at work, "but he wasn't a smart man. A smart man would have taken one of those corporate jobs and provided properly for his family. Instead, he left you all with nothing. He left us with a trust fund for college, I said defensively. A trust fund you can only use for college, Robert said, smirking. What if you want to start a business? What if you want to travel? Your father tied your hands. That's not love, that's control. With Marcus, Robert was even worse. He would criticize everything Marcus did, his grades, his appearance, his interests. You're too soft, Robert would say to Marcus. Your father made you soft. A man needs to be tough. A man needs to know how to stand up for himself. Marcus would retreat further into silence, and I would seethe with anger. But when I tried to tell my mother, she dismissed it. Robert is just trying to help, she would say. He's trying to be a father figure. He cares about you. He's not trying to be a father, I said. He's trying to erase Dad. Don't say that, my mother said, and there was warning in her voice. Your father is gone, Kennedy, and Robert is here. He's trying to build a relationship with you both, and you're making it harder than it needs to be. I felt like I was going crazy, like I was seeing something that no one else could see. 6 months after the wedding, things got worse. Robert started talking about money, about how the house was old and needed renovations, about how my mother was working too hard and should cut back her hours, about how they should take a vacation together, something my mother hadn't done in years. We could go to Jamaica, Robert said one evening at dinner. Just the two of us, a week away. You deserve it, Lorraine. I can't afford that, my mother said. You have savings, Robert said, and the kids are fine. Kennedy is about to go to college. Marcus is old enough to take care of himself for a week. I watched this conversation with growing unease. The savings are for emergencies, my mother said. This is an emergency, Robert said, smiling. An emergency of the soul. You're exhausted, baby. You need a break. My mother hesitated, and then she agreed. They went to Jamaica for a week. When they came back, my mother seemed lighter, happier. Robert had paid for everything, he told her. She didn't need to worry about money. But 2 weeks later, I found a credit card statement on the kitchen counter. It was in my mother's name. The bill was $8,000. Mom, I said, showing her the statement, what is this? Her face fell. Robert said he was paying for the vacation. He charged it to your credit card. He must have made a mistake, my mother said, but her voice was uncertain. When she confronted Robert, he laughed it off. I thought you were paying. I must have grabbed the wrong card at the restaurant. Don't worry, I'll reimburse you. He never did. Over the next year, this pattern repeated itself. Robert would suggest something, a new car, renovations to the house, expensive dinners, trips. He would promise to pay. And then, somehow, the charges would end up on my mother's credit cards or taken from her bank account. My mother's savings began to disappear. When I pointed this out to her, she defended him. Marriage is about sharing resources, she said. Robert contributes in other ways. He helps around the house. He supports me emotionally. He's using you, I said. You just don't like him, my mother said, and there was anger in her voice now. You don't like that I'm moving on from your father, but I have a right to be happy, Kennedy. I have a right to have a partner. You have a right to have a partner who doesn't steal from you, I said. He's not stealing. You're being dramatic. I was 18 by then, about to leave for college. Marcus was 15, still silent, still withdrawn. And Robert was draining my mother's finances while pretending to be the perfect husband. I started college at the University of Illinois in the fall. I was studying political science with the goal of going to law school, following in my father's footsteps. The trust fund that my father had set up paid for my tuition, housing, and books. It was a gift from a dead man, a final act of love that ensured I could get the education he valued so deeply. Marcus was still at home, now a sophomore in high school. He called me every week, and each call left me more worried. "Robert took my phone," Marcus said during one call. "Why?" "He said I was spending too much time on it. He said I needed to focus more on school." "What did Mom say?" "She agreed with him." "Marcus." "I'm fine, Kennedy. It's fine. I just wanted to tell you." But it wasn't fine. During Thanksgiving break of my freshman year, I came home to find that things had gotten worse. The house looked different. New furniture, a new PV, expensive artwork on the walls. Robert had a new car in the driveway, a BMW. "Where did all this come from?" I asked my mother. "Robert's been doing really well at work. He got a big bonus. He wanted to invest it in making our home nicer." But I could see the exhaustion in her face, the worry lines that hadn't been there before. That night, I was in the kitchen when I overheard Robert on the phone in the living room. "Yeah, I know, but I need more time. The wife's account is almost tapped out. I'm working on getting access to the kids' college fund. That's where the real money is." I froze. "No, it's in a trust, but there are ways around that. I just need to be patient. Once I get control of that, we're set." I felt ice in my veins. "Listen, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. Just give me 3 more months." I grabbed my phone and started recording. Over the winter break, I did some investigating. I contacted the trustee of my father's trust fund, a lawyer at my father's old nonprofit who had agreed to manage it. Her name was Sandra Martinez, and she had known my father for 20 years. "Sandra," I said when I met her in her office, "I need to know if anyone has tried to access my brother's portion of the trust fund." Sandra looked concerned. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I have reason to believe that my stepfather might be trying to steal it." Sandra pulled up the account. "There have been several inquiries," she said. "Someone claiming to be Marcus requested an early withdrawal for medical expenses. We denied it because the documentation wasn't sufficient, and because Marcus would need to appear in person to verify the request." "Medical expenses?" I said. "Marcus isn't sick." "I know," Sandra said. "That's why we denied it. But Kennedy, someone is definitely trying to access this money." I showed her the recording I had made of Robert's phone conversation. Sandra's face hardened. "We need to take this to the police." I didn't go to the police immediately. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand the full extent of what Robert had done. I started by looking into Robert's background. I hired a private investigator using money I had saved from a part-time job. It cost $2,000, money I couldn't really afford, but I needed to know. What the investigator found was worse than I could have imagined. Robert Blackwell wasn't even his real name. His real name was Robert Mason. He had changed his name legally 10 years earlier after being sued by 2 different women in 2 different states for fraud and theft. He had a pattern. He would target widows, women who were grieving, vulnerable, emotionally fragile. He would romance them, marry them, gain access to their financials, and then drain their accounts systematically. He had done this at least 3 times before my mother. And there was more. Robert Mason had a wife, a real wife. Her name was Angela Mason, and she lived in Indianapolis with their 2 children. They had been married for 15 years. Robert was a bigamist. His marriage to my mother wasn't even legal. I brought all of this to my mother during my spring break. I sat her down at the kitchen table and showed her everything: the investigator's report, the documentation of Robert's previous frauds, the marriage certificate from Indianapolis. My mother stared at the documents in silence for a long time. "This can't be real," she said finally. "It's real, Mom. Robert has been lying to you from the beginning. He targeted you because you were vulnerable. He married you to get access to your money and to Dad's trust fund." "No," my mother said, shaking her head. "No, Robert loves me. He wouldn't—" "Mom, he has another wife. He has other children. You need to accept this." My mother started crying, not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs. "I trusted him," she said. "I loved him. I thought he loved me." "I know," I said, putting my arm around her. "But we need to go to the police. We need to stop him before he takes everything." We went to the Chicago Police Department and filed a report. We brought all the evidence, the financial records showing how Robert had drained my mother's accounts, the recorded phone conversation, the private investigator's report, the documentation of his previous frauds. A detective named Maria Gonzalez took our statement. She listened carefully, asked questions, and then said, "This is a complex case. We're looking at fraud, identity theft, attempted theft of trust funds, and bigamy. We need to investigate further before we can make an arrest." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Weeks, possibly months," Detective Gonzalez said. "But in the meantime, you need to protect yourselves. Get a restraining order, change all your locks, close any joint accounts, make sure he can't access any more money." We did all of that. When Robert came home from work that evening, he found his belongings on the front porch and the locks changed. He called my mother repeatedly. He sent text messages. He showed up at the hospital where she worked. "This is a misunderstanding," he told her through her car window in the parking lot. "Let me explain. Whatever Kennedy told you is a lie." But my mother had seen the evidence. She knew the truth. She told him to leave her alone or she would call the police. As Detective Gonzalez investigated Robert's activities, she uncovered something that would change everything. She was looking into Robert's timeline, where he had been, what he had been doing in the years before he met my mother, and she discovered something strange. 3 years before my father died, Robert had worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep at the same hospital where my mother worked. He had left that job and taken a position at a different company, but he had been working at Cook County Hospital during the time when my father was still alive. Detective Gonzalez pulled security footage from the hospital from around the time of my father's accident, the day he was killed, and she found something chilling. On the day of my father's accident, the day he was killed, Robert had been at the hospital. He had been seen talking to several people, including a man who worked in the hospital's maintenance department. Detective Gonzalez tracked down that man. His name was David Pruitt, and he had left Cook County Hospital shortly after my father died. Detective Gonzalez found him working at a hospital in Gary, Indiana. When she interviewed him, he initially denied knowing anything, but when she pressed him, when she told him that lying to the police during a homicide investigation was a crime, he broke down. "He paid me," David said. "Robert paid me to do it." "Do what?" Detective Gonzalez asked. "To cause the accident. He wanted me to hurt someone, to kill someone so he could swoop in and comfort the widow. He said he had done it before. He said it was easy." Detective Gonzalez felt her stomach drop. "Who did he want you to hurt?" "A lawyer," David said. "A guy named Jonathan Harper." Detective Gonzalez investigated further. She brought in the FBI because the case now crossed state lines and involved multiple frauds. What they discovered was horrifying. Robert Mason, under various names, had been running this scheme for over a decade. He would identify vulnerable women, usually widows or divorcees with some financial assets, but instead of just waiting for tragedy to strike, sometimes he would create the tragedy himself. He had been involved in at least 2 other deaths that the FBI knew of. In one case, a husband had died in a house fire that was ruled accidental. In another, a husband had died from a supposed accidental overdose of medication. And in my father's case, Robert had hired David Pruitt to tamper with the vehicle of Richard Cole, the man whose car had hit my father. David had disabled Richard's anti-seizure medication and installed a device that would cause Richard's brakes to fail at a specific intersection. Robert orchestrated my father's death. He had killed my father so he could marry my mother and steal her money. When my mother and I were told this by Detective Gonzalez, my mother collapsed. She screamed, she vomited, she couldn't process what she was hearing. "He killed Jonathan," she kept saying. "He killed my husband. He killed the father of my children. And then he came into our home and pretended to love us." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the world had tilted on its axis. My father hadn't died in a random accident. He had been murdered. He had been murdered by the man who would later marry his widow and try to steal his children's inheritance. Robert Mason was arrested 3 months after we filed the initial police report. He was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Jonathan Harper, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, identity theft, attempted theft of trust funds, and bigamy. He pled not guilty to all charges. His lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that David Pruitt was lying to reduce his own sentence, that there was no physical evidence tying Robert to the crime. But the prosecutors had built a strong case. They had David Pruitt's testimony, they had financial records showing how Robert had drained my mother's accounts, the recorded phone conversation, the private investigator's report, the documentation of his previous frauds. The trial began in October, nearly 4 years after my father died. My mother, Marcus, and I all testified at the trial. My mother testified about how Robert had courted her, married her, and systematically drained her finances. She testified about the financial records, the credit card bills, the disappearing savings. She cried on the stand. She said, "I trusted him. I loved him. I thought he loved me." Marcus testified about how Robert had treated him, the cruelty, the criticism, the attempts to erase our father's memory. And I testified about everything, about the recordings I had made, about the investigation, about discovering the truth. When the prosecutor asked me how I felt about Robert, I looked directly at him, sitting at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and composed. I said, "He stole my father from me. He stole 3 years of my mother's life. He tried to steal the legacy my father left from me and my brother. He is evil in the purest sense of the word, and I want him to spend the rest of his life in prison." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous on all counts: guilty. Robert Mason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of my father. He received additional consecutive sentences for the other charges: fraud, identity theft, bigamy. In total, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. When the judge read the sentence, Robert showed no emotion. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. But I saw it. I saw the moment when he realized that his game was over, that he had finally been caught. My mother cried tears of relief and grief. Marcus put his arm around me. Grandma Dorothy whispered, "Justice. Finally, justice." After the trial, our family had to rebuild. The process was slow and painful. My mother went to therapy, individual therapy and family therapy with Marcus and me. She had to process the trauma of being married to the man who had killed her husband. She had to process the guilt of not seeing it sooner, even though none of it was her fault. "I should have known," she said again and again. "I should have seen it." "You were grieving," her therapist told her. "You were vulnerable. He exploited that. This is not your fault." It took years for her to believe that. Marcus struggled too. He had spent 3 years living with the man who had killed our father, the man who had been cruel to him, who had tried to erase his memories of Dad. "I hate him," Marcus would say. "I will hate him for the rest of my life." "That's okay," I told him. "You have a right to your anger. You have a right to your pain." The trust fund that my father had set up for Marcus and me was still intact. Robert had never managed to access it, thanks to the safeguards my father had put in place and Sandra Martinez's vigilance. Marcus and I both used that money to go to college, Marcus to study psychology, hoping to help other kids who had experienced trauma, and me to go to law school, following in my father's footsteps. I graduated from Northwestern Law School, the same school my father had attended. I took a job at Justice Forward, the same nonprofit where my father had worked. On my first day, I sat in an office just down the hall from where my father's office had been. I looked at the pictures of him that still hung in the hallway, images of him at rallies, at press conferences, accepting awards. "Your father would be proud," Sandra Martinez told me. She had stayed at the nonprofit, continuing his work. "I hope so," I said. "I know so," she replied. "I'm 28 years old now. I've been working at Justice Forward for 3 years. I represent people who can't afford lawyers, just like my father did. My mother is healthier now. She still works at Cook County Hospital, still helps people, still carries the weight of what happened, but she's found peace in her own way. She volunteers at a support group for widows. She helps women who are where she was, vulnerable, grieving, trying to rebuild. I want to help them avoid what happened to me," she says. "I want them to know what to look for, how to protect themselves." Marcus is 25 now. He finished his bachelor's degree in psychology and is working on his master's thesis about childhood trauma and resilience. He's become an advocate for children who have lost parents, speaking at conferences and writing articles about grief and recovery. I was promoted at Justice Forward. I'm now the managing attorney for the Family Law Division, helping people navigate divorces, custody battles, and domestic violence situations. Every day I think about my father and the work he did. Every day I try to honor his memory. Grandma Dorothy is still the center of our family. She turned 80 this year, and we threw her a big party. She gave a speech about resilience, about surviving the worst things life can throw at you, about choosing to love and trust again after betrayal. "Your grandfather used to say," she told everyone at the party, "that life will knock you down, but the measure of a person is whether they choose to get back up. Jonathan got back up every single day, fighting for people who needed him. Lorraine got back up after losing the love of her life, twice. Kennedy and Marcus got back up after losing their father and being betrayed by someone they were told to trust. This family knows how to survive, and more importantly, this family knows how to thrive." I'm standing now in the same courtroom where Robert Mason was convicted. I'm here for a different case, representing a woman who is trying to get a restraining order against her abusive ex-husband. As I present evidence to the judge, I think about my father, about the legacy he left, about the trust fund that allowed me to become a lawyer, about the values he instilled in me. I think about the words he used to say. "Justice doesn't always happen quickly, but it does happen, and when it does, it's worth the wait." He was right. Robert Mason is in prison, where he will remain for the rest of his life. The other victims he defrauded have been compensated through restitution orders. Richard Cole, the man whose car was used as the murder weapon, was exonerated and has since become an advocate for epilepsy awareness. And my family has survived. We have more than survived. We have built new lives on the foundation of my father's love and sacrifice. We have honored his memory not by being consumed by anger or bitterness, but by choosing to help others, to fight for justice, to love fiercely and carefully. My father's legacy isn't the money he left us. His legacy is the choice we've made to turn tragedy into purpose, grief into action, pain into compassion. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: you are not defined by what happens to you. You are defined by what you choose to do afterward. My father was murdered. My mother was betrayed. My brother and I lost years of our childhood to trauma and grief. But we chose to survive. We chose to heal. We chose to honor my father's memory by living lives that matter. And that, more than any prison sentence, is the ultimate justice. These are words my father wrote in a journal we found after his death. He never knew they would be his last gift to us. To my children, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I want you to know something important. Life is not fair. Justice is not guaranteed. Good people suffer, and bad people sometimes win. But none of that matters as much as this. The choice is always yours. You can choose bitterness or compassion. You can choose anger or healing. You can choose to be consumed by what was done to you, or you can choose to define yourself by what you do for others. I have chosen to spend my life fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I have chosen to believe that the world can be better, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. I have chosen love over hate, hope over despair, action over resignation. I hope you make the same choices. Kennedy, you have your mother's strength and my stubborn belief in justice. Use it. Fight for people who need you. Don't ever let anyone tell you that the fight isn't worth it. Marcus, you have your mother's compassion and my heart. Don't let the world make you hard. Stay soft, stay kind, stay empathetic. The world needs more people like you. Both of you, remember that I loved you more than life itself. Remember that you are capable of extraordinary things. Remember that my love for you doesn't end just because I do. Be kind, be brave, be relentless in your pursuit of justice. That's all that matters. Love always, Dad. This story is about many things. It's about the evil that can hide behind a kind face. It's about the vulnerability of grief. It's about the long arc toward justice. But most importantly, it's about survival. My family survived something that should have destroyed us. We survived betrayal, murder, fraud, and years of manipulation. And we didn't just survive, we thrived. We chose to honor my father's memory not by being destroyed by what was done to us, but by becoming people who fight for others, who help the vulnerable, who refuse to let evil win. That's what my father would have wanted. That's what he spent his life doing, and that's what we will continue to do for the rest of our lives. The shadow husband is gone, the truth has been told, and my family is finally free. The circle was broken, but we rebuilt it, stronger than before.